Okay, let's begin. So, hi, Dr. Barzilai. You're the founder of the Institute of Aging Research at the Albert Einstein College of Medicine, and it's a pleasure to be interviewing you today. So, there has been some amazing research conducted by you on the topic of Ashkenazi Jews, as far as I understand, who have shown a high pattern of longevity as a nation altogether. And if I'm correct, your research is mainly regarding hereditary aspects of longevity. So, would you be able to give us an overview of this research and then what you're currently studying at this moment?
Yeah, well, first of all, I'm studying much more than that. So let's just start with something very important before I answer the question.
Of
You
course.
know, there is a biology for aging, right? Because you know who's old and who's young. What you don't know is that this biology actually drives the diseases of aging. So that's what drives heart disease and cancer, diabetes, and Alzheimer's. And so the thought was that if you can target the process of aging, you can actually delay those diseases. And that's what we've shown. We've really shown that aging is very flexible. And you can target aging, and therefore you can delay. And in some instances, you can reverse and stop the process of aging. So it's in relationship to this that I'll answer your question, okay?
Mm-hmm. Yes, thank you so much for that.
So, so, so one of the things we did with understanding aging and why it happens so fast is rather than look at the minutiae of aging, because aging is very complex and different in every cell and organ and body, we made a headway by looking at animals that by some intervention or some mistake, they live much longer. For example, horse in nature live longer. The small dogs live longer than the big dog, and the ponies live longer than the thoroughbred. And and when you do those experiments in mice, whether they were born dwarfs or made dwarfs, they all live so much longer. So so a lot of the things that we learned about aging has to do with the example that I just gave. And therefore, when we started showing that aging is flexible, we started asking the following question. Is the biological age and chronological age of people the same? Now, you're young people, and so you have parents, you have grandparents, and you know what I'm talking about. You're talking about people who are the same age, and some of them look young and active and energetic, and some of them, the same age, look much older and they're slower. And we thought that we want to understand what happens, to define people who have slower aging.
Mm-hmm.
And that's why we started looking at 100 years old. Okay, and our hypothesis was that their aging has been slowed significantly. And if we could find the genetic underpinning of that, we might develop medications that will help all of us slow our age.
All right, and you're also famous for the discovery of several longevity genes. So, would you be able to broadly explain what they are and how they work?
Right. So, first of all, it's not that centenarians have genes that others do not have. Okay, that's not what happens.
Mm-hmm.
When we say longevity genes, we mean that there's alteration in genes that we have that make us slow our aging. So since I gave you the example of the dwarf, let me tell you that one of the important genes or pathways that are responsible for dwarfism is the growth hormone gene. There's actually one hormone that's called growth hormone, but uh, but there are actually several growth hormones in our body. And our centenarians, 60% of our centenarians have some mutation that in the growth hormone uh, axis, in the growth hormone gene,
Mhm.
that we think are very important for them to achieve longevity and slow their aging.
Thank you so much for that. And I've also prepared some questions that many teenagers are interested in, and I and numerous others are really keen on hearing your point of view about them. So, the first question: if you had to sum up longevity research in one or two sentences for all the teenagers in this planet, what would it be?
So that's a really good question, and I appreciate it. And I have to tell you, not many are asking me that. Okay, but let me give you a bigger view.
Mhm.
Of course, the simple view is we want our grandparents to be healthier as they age because it's going to be good for them rather than deal with diseases, right? And we want them to have a good quality of life. But this is not only about them. For example, young people and old people that survive cancer, they're aging very rapidly because the treatments for cancers like radiation or chemotherapy are aging people. So they they really age quickly, and some even young people have, for example, they get heart attacks at younger age. So we need to help them. People with HIV, uh, they get diseases 10 years younger than people their age, so they need help. People who are disabled and they cannot move, and maybe they eat a little bit more because they're not moving also, they get sick at a very young age and they need help. I would actually say that for people, if we had a drug that is cheap, and we have one that is cheap, that targets aging, then those poor people cannot afford healthy food and they cannot afford going to the gym. Maybe one drug can help them stay healthy. And if we want to go to Mars, okay, if that's a human wish, it's something we want to achieve, we have to stop aging because by the time we get to Mars, we'll get sick with cancer or heart disease and we'll never be there.
Mhm.
Okay? So we're not talking only about old people. We are talking about the need to stop accelerated aging to many people and to allow us as humanity achieve maybe next goal.
And how has longevity research helped you grow as an individual in your approach to life and work in general?
That's also a good question, and it's us researchers, um, for example, in diabetes, many researchers who have diabetes, okay, it's personal to them. And in cancer, you see many cancer survivors, right? So that's a good question, and I don't come from a family who has exceptional longevity, okay? But I'm really obsessed with aging. I never liked, even as a kid, I never understood this process. I never understood why people are not paying attention. When I walked with my grandfather, I was 13, he was 68 the day he died, the year he died, and he was telling me stories of what he did when he was young, and it made no sense to me that this guy that barely walks and is fat and with white hair, that he did all those things. It really didn't make sense to me.
Mhm.
So uh, there are several things that I'm doing now. Um, One of them, so look, the most important thing that we can do has to do with exercise and diet. Okay? At any age, any sex, exercise is beneficial.
Mhm.
And I do exercise, almost an hour a day. I really try to move as much as I can because exercise is really upgrading your ability to deal with aging.
Mhm.
The second thing that I'm doing is diet, but I'm doing diet that is relevant to aging. So maybe I'll tell you a little bit about that.
Yes, please.
In my laboratory, I always, I try to make mice live longer, okay, and figure out if it's relevant to humans. And and one of the things we used to do, or still doing, is caloric restriction. You take mice and you just divide them to two groups. Some are eating whatever they want, and the others are getting 60% or 70% of that. So we restrict their calories.
Mhm.
And if you do that, then the mice that are restricted in calories will live healthier and much longer, like 40% longer. Now, people took it to say that if you give less for breakfast, less for lunch, less for dinner, then you live longer, okay? But that's not what we've done. We actually brought all the food in the morning, those hungry mice or rats, and they ate all the food like in 20 minutes because they were so hungry.
Mhm.
Then they were fasting for 23 hours. And it's the fasting that was important. In fact, when we gave them little food throughout the day, they were much thinner, but they didn't live longer. So my translation to that is that I'm fasting every day for 16 hours at least. I'm really skipping breakfast. Whenever I finish eating at night, I'm looking at the clock and I'm saying, okay, 16 hours from now. So if it was 8 o'clock, I'm not going to have anything before noon. I do have coffee without sugar, but I'm not cheating. I'm not having anything else.
Mhm.
And and trying to imitate this fasting, not because I'm trying to lose weight, but because I'm trying to take care of my aging.
Thank you for describing the mouse experiment. It was really fascinating. I will read some information about that just because out of personal interest. And next question. What would you say is the most difficult aspect of longevity research, both generally and for you personally?
We can always do more with grants. Okay, the money for research is always something that we wish we had more because we believe we could have gotten it to be faster. Or and that's general in science, but specifically for us, I'll give you an example.
Mhm.
Um, you we get grants for about 5 years. Okay? So in 5 years, you can do a lot of experiments. But as I told you with the longevity experiment, if we take mice and rats and we want to have enough numbers in order to determine their longevity, then they live on average for more than 3 years. And so until you set them up and until you start the experiment and until you analyze the experiment beyond the scope of your grant, also beyond the scope of your graduate student or postdoc because they want to have a project and finish it. And it's not enough reasonable amount of time. So uh, for us specifically, is how do we organize experiments that takes years in a way that everybody that you train can benefit and that you have enough money to sustain it.
And was there ever a moment when you wanted to stop researching longevity? If so, why?
So, when I started the research on longevity, we basically had hope that, we learned something and maybe something can be done about it. And moving from hope to promise was very substantial from the start. Once I saw that in the lab I have models that will live longer, it was much, it gave you, it took you from hope to promise much more rapidly. So I never really doubted that we can be successful. I just wanted to make it faster.
Mm-hmm.
I'll tell you another challenge. You can appreciate when we started looking at 100 years old. Really, the question on the back of my mind was, okay, do they get sick when all of us get sick? And they live longer, but they live sick for more years, right? That's not that's not really what I wanted. But is it that their health, their life and health goes together? In other words, their health span is increased, not only their lifespan. And we showed that that's indeed the case. Our centenarians live not only healthier, but 20, 30 years they live healthier and not only longer. Um, so, for example, at age 80 in our control population, those without longevity, only 10% don't have any disease. But at 100 years old, almost 30% don't have any disease. And they will die one day. They will just not wake up one day. And and so that was important for us to know. Otherwise, what are we doing? And the and then we found out another thing, that for most of us, we live we so I'm in a moving car, and if I go through someplace and it happens again, I'll just call again. Okay?
Problem. Yes.
I can't hear you.
Yes, yes, I said yes. No problem.
Okay. So I was talking before we were disconnected. I was talking about the fact
Oh,
that
sorry.
it's not only about living longer, but being sick less at the end of life. What we call a contraction of morbidity. So you spend, rather than years sick at the end of life, you spend maybe months or weeks sick at the end of life, or just not wake up one morning. So that's another thing that was eventually resolved.
And now, with the rise of technology, quarantining, and recent rapid changes in lifestyles, people are becoming more concerned with mental health. How do you think longer lifespans could affect mental health conditions?
Well, the we have grants for Alzheimer's because the question is, how come our centenarians were healthy in their body and in their brain? And the answer is because aging is the same risk factor in every organ in our body, and and therefore the mechanism of treating aging are totally relevant to the cognitive aspects of our life. And that's why it's so important to target aging, because if you stop the aging of the brain and the body, then you harmonize everything, and it's the same mechanism. I'll give you an example, a biological example. There is a process, it's called autophagy. Autophagy is really the garbage disposal of our cells.
Mm-hmm.
We actually can dispose of things that are not formed right, like protein, and break them apart, and it's green energy because it now circulates, and we can build better things with those products now. And this process, autophagy, the garbage disposal, increased with aging. So where do we see it a lot? In Alzheimer's, okay, where there's an accumulation of a protein that's called A-beta amyloid. And by targeting this process of aging, we can clear this peptide from the brain just as much as we can clear it from the liver or other organs.
Mm-hmm.
Basically telling you that the biology of aging is relevant so that we could absolutely live healthier mentally, cognitively, and physically, which all goes together.
And would you say longevity research conflicts with a 21st century lifestyle? And if yes, then how?
Well, what we're talking about is health span, right? We're talking about increasing your health and decreasing your morbidity at the end of life. So, like, what's wrong with it? I mean, we're now trying to treat disease when we get them, and we showed you don't need to get those diseases. Just stop the aging process. So I don't think it's contradictory to what individuals want. And in fact, there's what we call a longevity dividend, which means that there's going to be a save in society if we can decrease sickness and decrease the sickness also at the end of life. Then there's trillions and trillions of dollars to be saved all around the world in a very short time.
Would you say that if a revolutionary discovery about dietary requirements, for example, was made, like, for example, recent findings have shown, as you have said, that when mice eat less in general, they live longer, and maybe this is applicable to humans as well, how willing do you think people would be to accept this and follow the given advice?
You know, you can see with vaccination, there are always people that don't want for many reasons. Okay, but when people understand that if they take the vaccine, their chances of being in a hospital or dying is decreased, they take it, and the majority will take it. And I don't think it's different in this than what you see with the vaccine. If people choose not to live healthier, then, you know, what can I say? It's their right. But I bet that a lot of people will sign in.
Mm-hmm.
If your dream was always to have Alzheimer's, then fine.
Yeah, I understand that. And just some more general questions now. What do you think is important to do now to progress longevity research, except for giving grants and funding experiments?
Well, one of my major efforts today is to convince the regulatory institutions. So, for example, in the United States, we have the Food and Drug Administration. And the Food and Drug Administration has to approve every drug for its use. And we are trying to convince them that aging is preventable by doing a study. And I think once those guys will understand that, then more drugs will be developed, more pharmaceuticals will be involved, and the government will understand that it's a major role for them to make sure that we have better drugs, combination of drugs, and really start making progress with aging.
Which main areas of science would you recommend for young people to study if they want to enter longevity?
So what we geroscientists, have a consensus that there are some hallmarks for aging. And the hallmarks for aging, you have to see them in I cannot show you, so you'll have to read about that.
Mhm.
But to be a hallmark of aging, you have to show that something goes wrong with aging, and when you fix these animals, they live healthier and longer. And there are eight such hallmarks that are interesting because they're interacting. You can fix one, and by that fix some of the others. So you don't have to fix everything in order to get an impact.
Uh-huh.
And so my advice is go go to those hallmarks and see what excites you. I just gave an example of autophagy, which is under the hallmark of proteostasis. Um, but people who are looking at autophagy are developing drugs to accelerate autophagy and to improve, you know, Alzheimer's disease, but also to prevent aging. So there are many options like that. One other is the declining immunity that got us to so much trouble with COVID.
Mhm.
COVID, the virus has no eyes, but it picked on the elderly, right? If you're over the age of 80, your chances of dying was 200 times more than when you're in 20. When
Mhm.
you're 20, we can fix it. And we can prepare for the next pandemic too.
And the last question now. What advice do you have in general for high school students who are interested in longevity?
So I think that what happened, so I'll tell you this, old people, to my surprise, are more skeptical about their potential than young people. Young people who really understand the benefit of targeting aging for the world and for themselves. And so we are now catching a wave. Okay, we're doing lots of things. There are new foundations. There's biotech. There's accelerated funding for aging, and we have to have you as part of our team. We have to have you tell your government we don't want our grandparents to be sick. We want our grandparents to take care of their grandchildren rather than the children taking care of the grandparents. We need a better world, and that's how we can achieve it all over.
Thank you so much. Thank you for all of your answers. And these were all of my questions for today. It was a pleasure to speak to you and to interview you. Thank you.
Thank you,